The silence of the Mojave Desert wasn't truly silent. It hummed. A low, persistent thrum of wind through creosote bushes, the rustle of unseen creatures in the sand, and for Jack, a symphony of static from his array of homemade antennae. He preferred this symphony to any other. It was honest, predictable, a constant reminder of the vast, indifferent universe he so eagerly sought to listen to. Jack lived in a battered Airstream trailer, a silver bullet stranded in a sea of sand and scrub, miles from the nearest paved road. His closest neighbor was a lone Joshua tree, its gnarled branches reaching towards the perpetually star-dusted sky like ancient, silent prophets. He'd found his peace here, away from the clamor of cities, the ceaseless chatter of humanity. Here, with his radios, he was free to listen. His face, etched with the fine lines of sun and solitude, was bathed in the dim green glow of his radio receiver. Knobs worn smooth from countless adjustments, dials flickering with unreadable data. He was searching, as always, for anomalies, for something that wasn't supposed to be there. Most nights it was just the usual cosmic background noise, the echoes of the Big Bang or the distant chatter of satellites. Human noise, predictable and often disappointing. Tonight, however, felt different. The air was unnaturally still, the kind of oppressive stillness that precedes a dust storm or perhaps something far more profound. He'd been sweeping through the ultra-low frequencies, a band few bothered with, when a flicker caught his eye. A tiny, almost imperceptible blip on the waterfall display. He paused, his calloused finger hovering over a dial. It was gone, a phantom. He dismissed it as interference, a quirk of the ionosphere, and continued his slow, methodical sweep. But a seed had been planted, an itch he couldn't scratch. Jack knew the desert. He knew its sounds, its moods, and this felt new. Hours passed. The desert night deepened, the stars becoming sharper, brighter, like pinpricks in a vast black velvet curtain. A coyote howled in the distance, a mournful, lonely sound that amplified the solitude. Jack was almost ready to call it a night, his eyelids growing heavy, when it happened again. Not a blip this time. A faint, almost imperceptible pattern. A rhythmic pulse, far too structured to be natural static, far too deep to be an orbiting satellite. It was weak, barely registering above the noise floor, but it was there, and it was not from space. Jack leaned closer, his heart giving a slow, deliberate thump against his ribs. He adjusted the gain, fine-tuned the antenna's direction, ignoring the growing fatigue. The signal strengthened, ever so slightly. It wasn't a burst, it was continuous. A slow, steady hum, punctuated by subtle shifts in frequency, like a hidden alien language whispering just beyond the veil of perception. He checked his GPS coordinates, then double-checked them. The signal source, according to his rudimentary triangulation, was directly below him. Not miles away, not in the sky, directly under his feet, beneath the very patch of ancient desert where his Airstream had rested for years. A chill, colder than the desert night, traced its way down his spine. The Mojave Desert, a place of endless myths and whispered legends, UFO sightings, secret government bases, unexplained phenomena. He'd always scoffed at the sensationalism, preferring the cold, hard data of his receivers. But now, the data was telling him something impossible. He took a deep, steadying breath. This wasn't static. This wasn't a weather balloon. This was a message, and it was coming from the depths of the earth, right here, in the heart of the silent, waiting desert. Sleep was a luxury Jack couldn't afford. Not now. The sun began its slow ascent, painting the eastern sky in hues of apricot and rose, but Jack barely noticed. His world had shrunk to the confines of his small workstation, to the cryptic signal that pulsed from the earth beneath him. It was a siren's call, and he was utterly captivated. He spent the first hours of dawn running diagnostics, trying to debunk his own discovery. Could it be a deep Earth geological survey? A military encrypted channel bleeding from a nearby base? He cross-referenced every known frequency, every registered transmission in the region. Nothing. This signal was an island, existing in a spectrum that should have been silent. It was clean, unnaturally so, with no astatic or interference, as if broadcast in a perfect vacuum. The signal wasn't just a pulse, it was a language, a complex, layered stream of data that made Morse code look like a child's drawing. He routed the audio through a spectrograph, watching the patterns bloom on his monitor. It was breathtaking, symmetrical, intricate, filled with repeating motifs and mathematical progressions that hinted at a profound intelligence. There were prime numbers, constants like pi and the golden ratio embedded in the carrier wave, like a universal greeting card. It was a message designed to be found, to be understood. "Hello," Jack whispered to the glowing screen, a wry smile touching his lips. He felt a strange kinship with the source. Whoever or whatever was sending this message was a mathematician, an artist even. The patterns were elegant, efficient, but what were they saying? He recorded hours of the transmission, letting the magnetic tape spools turn with a soft, rhythmic whir. He needed more data. He needed to understand the structure before he could even dream of deciphering the content. By midday, the desert heat was punishing. The airstream became a convection oven, the air thick and still. Jack, fueled by lukewarm coffee and adrenaline, rigged a new antenna, a directional, deep-penetrating sensor he'd built years ago for a project he'd long since abandoned. He dragged it out onto the scorched earth, the metal hot to the touch, and began taking readings from different positions around his camp. The results were chillingly precise. The signal wasn't just underneath him, it was emanating from a single, stationary point approximately 2 miles below the surface, a depth that defied any conventional drilling or mining operations. The signal was also incredibly focused, a tight beam aimed directly upwards. He wasn't just an accidental listener, he was in the exact center of the broadcast cone, as if the signal had been waiting for someone, for him to place an antenna right there. The coincidence was too great to ignore. For years he'd lived here, in this specific, unremarkable patch of desert. Why here? Was it fate? Or was something else at play? He looked around at the desolate landscape, the shimmering heat haze distorting the horizon. The feeling of solitude he'd always cherished was gone, replaced by a new, unsettling sensation. He was being watched, not from the sky, but from the deep, silent earth beneath his feet.
Listening was one thing. Answering was another entirely. The thought alone felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an unknown abyss. For 2 days, Jack had done nothing but analyze the signal. He'd mapped its structure, identified its core frequencies, and even isolated what he believed were repeating phrases or blocks of data. The message was a masterclass in cosmic communication, a beacon of intelligence. But it was a monologue, a broadcast sent out into the void, perhaps for centuries, waiting for a reply. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was chosen. The signal's precise location, its focused beam, it was too perfect to be an accident. He was the intended recipient, And if that were true, then silence was no longer an option. It was a failure. His decision was made in the quietest hour of the night, when the desert was at its most profound and the stars seemed close enough to touch. He would send a reply. Not with words, not with human language, which would be hopelessly primitive and indecipherable. He would reply in the language the signal had taught him, the universal language of mathematics. He spent the next several hours preparing. His plan was simple, yet elegant. He would isolate the primary carrier frequency of the alien signal and broadcast a new sequence on top of it, a simple reply. He chose the Fibonacci sequence: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. A mathematical pattern that is intrinsically linked to life and growth, a signature of biology. It was a way of saying, we are here, we are alive, and we understand your language. He reconfigured his most powerful transmitter, bypassing safety protocols to push a focused beam of energy directly into the ground, aiming for the signal's source 2 miles below. His fingers trembled slightly as he keyed in the sequence. The generator outside the airstream coughed to life, its roar momentarily drowning out the gentle hum of the desert. The lights in the trailer flickered as power was diverted. He took a breath, his finger hovering over the transmit button. This was it, the moment he crossed the line from observer to participant. He could be inviting discovery, danger, or something beyond his comprehension. But the curiosity, the fundamental driving need to know, overpowered the fear. He pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. The power drain was immense, but his equipment held. The sequence, encoded as a series of simple binary pulses, was sent into the Earth. A single digital pebble dropped into a vast, subterranean ocean. He transmitted the sequence 3 times, then cut the power. The generator sputtered into silence. The only sound was the frantic thumping of his own heart and the ever-present alien hum from his speakers. He waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. The signal from below continued its monologue, unchanged, unwavering. A knot of disappointment tightened in his stomach. Had it been too weak, too simple? Was there no one listening at the other end at all? And then, it happened. The signal stopped. For the first time in over 48 hours, the carrier wave vanished. The speakers, which had been humming with the alien language, fell utterly silent. The silence was deafening, a sudden shocking void that was more terrifying than the signal itself. Jack stared at his monitor, his breath caught in his throat. The waterfall display was a flat, dead line. He had silenced the ancient voice. He had angered the ghost in the machine. His hand shot out to shut down his own equipment, a primal instinct to hide screaming in his mind. But before he could touch the switch, the signal returned. It was different. The frequency was the same, but the pattern, the language had changed. It was no longer the calm mathematical monologue. It was faster, more complex, more urgent. And embedded within the new stream of data was clear as a bell, his own sequence, the Fibonacci sequence, repeated back to him. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And then it continued. 21, 34, 55. The message was unmistakable. We hear you, we understand, and we have been waiting. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless obsession. The signal was no longer a monologue, it was a dialogue, a frantic, exhilarating exchange of information that pushed Jack to the absolute limits of his understanding. The entity below, he'd started thinking of it as a single consciousness, was a voracious learner. It absorbed every mathematical concept he sent, from basic algebra to complex calculus, and responded with patterns of its own that were orders of magnitude more sophisticated. It was like teaching a child who could outperform Einstein within hours. But this was no child. This was something ancient, powerful, and incredibly patient. The new signal was also changing him. The constant low-frequency hum resonated not just in his equipment, but in his bones, in the very air he breathed. He slept less, ate little, his mind consumed by the data stream. He started experiencing strange phenomena. The scent of rain on dry earth even when the sky was clear. A faint melodic chiming in the quietest hours of the night that his microphones couldn't detect. The desert, once his sanctuary of solitude, now felt alive, aware, and focused entirely on him. But the most significant change was in the data itself. The signal was no longer just abstract mathematics. Interspersed within the complex equations were new patterns. Star charts of unknown constellations, schematics for devices that defied physics as he knew it, and, most chillingly, diagrams that looked disturbingly like biological blueprints, alien and yet eerily familiar. It was an invitation, an offering of knowledge, a beckoning. The entity wasn't just saying we are here, it was saying this is who we are, this is what we know. It was an act of profound trust, but it came with a terrifying implication. What did it want in return? One evening, while running a routine diagnostic sweep of the surrounding area, Jack noticed something new. A different signal, faint and fleeting on a standard encrypted government frequency. It was a burst transmission, lasting for only a few seconds, originating from a ridge several miles away. It was human, and it was professional. Jack froze, his blood turning to ice. He was no fool. He knew the proximity of his camp to secretive installations like Area 51 and the Nevada test site. He had always been careful to stay off the grid, to be a ghost, but a transmission of this power, aimed directly into the Earth, was not a subtle act. It was a flare in the dark, and someone had seen it. He grabbed his high-powered binoculars and scanned the distant ridgeline. For a long time, he saw nothing but rocks and shadows under the setting sun. Then, a glint, a tiny flash of reflected light, the lens of a camera or a telescope aimed directly at his camp. He was no longer alone in the desert. The dialogue he had started was no longer private. The silence of the Mojave had been broken, and now others were coming to listen.
Paranoia as a cold and heavy blanket. Jack felt its weight settle over him as darkness reclaimed the desert. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. Every shadow seemed to hide a figure. The watchers on the ridge were a clear, tangible threat, unlike the enigma 2 miles beneath him. He was caught between two vastly different and equally terrifying unknowns. He spent the night reinforcing his solitude. He killed his lights, powered down non-essential systems, and even threw a camouflage net over the reflective surface of the airstream. He was trying to disappear, to become just another shadow in a landscape of shadows, but he knew it was futile. They knew he was here. He returned to his radio, not out of curiosity now, but out of a desperate need for guidance. He put on his headphones, shutting out the deceptive sounds of the desert, and listened. The signal had changed again. The complex schematics and star charts were gone. In their place was a single, repeating image, rendered in sound waves. It took him an hour to decode it, and when he did, a shiver ran through him. It was a map, a detailed topographical map of his immediate surroundings. He saw the familiar shape of the dry riverbed, the slope of the hills, and a small, precise marker that indicated the location of his trailer. And to the west, on the ridgeline, was another marker, flashing slowly, rhythmically, the location of the observers. The entity below knew. It wasn't just aware of him, it was aware of the others. The message was no longer an invitation to learn, it was a warning. The steady, mathematical hum had been joined by a new layer, a low, intermittent pulse, like a slow, deep heartbeat. Danger, you are not alone. Danger. Sleep was impossible. He sat in the darkness, watching the ridge through his binoculars until his eyes ached. Nothing. No lights, no movement, but their presence was a palpable weight on the horizon. Who were they? A Black Ops military unit? A clandestine agency he'd only read about on conspiracy forums? What did they want? His research? The signal itself? Just before dawn, driven by a restless energy, he slipped out of the trailer. He had to know how close they had come. He moved with a practiced silence, his boots barely disturbing the sand, and began to circle his camp in an ever-widening spiral. He found it half a mile from the trailer. A single, crisp tire track pressed deep into the sand. It was wide, with a heavy, aggressive tread he'd never seen on a civilian vehicle. This was a military reconnaissance vehicle, and it had been here recently, probably while he was engrossed in the signal. They weren't just watching from a distance anymore, they were probing. He followed the track, his heart hammering against his ribs. It led him towards a small rocky outcrop, and there, glinting in the first rays of the morning sun, was something small and metallic. He knelt, his fingers brushing away the sand. It was a spent shell casing. But it wasn't brass. It was a strange dark gray alloy, impossibly light, with no markings or insignia. He picked it up. It felt cool and smooth in his palm. This was not standard military hardware. This was something else, something advanced. He realized with dawning horror that the people watching him might be just as alien as the intelligence buried beneath his feet. The discovery of the casing shattered his last illusion of safety. This wasn't a standard military operation. The shell felt wrong, its material and design leagues beyond anything he knew. The group on the ridge was well-funded, technologically superior, and operating completely outside of established rules. They weren't here to observe, they were here to contain, and eventually to acquire. He and the signal were their targets. He scrambled back to his console, a desperate plan forming in his mind. He needed to ask the entity below what he was facing. Who were these people? What was their technology? But when he put on his headphones, his blood ran cold. The signal was gone. In its place was a roaring, chaotic wall of white noise. A powerful, wide-spectrum jamming signal was blanketing all low frequencies. It was a digital sledgehammer, crude but brutally effective. The observers were cutting him off, isolating him from his only potential ally. The silence from below was now forced, artificial. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in his throat. He was blind, deaf, and alone. The watchers could move in at any moment. He fought the urge to run, forcing his mind to work, to think like the engineer he was. A jammer, no matter how powerful, has limits. It has a source, a frequency range, and potential weaknesses. For hours he worked feverishly, his trailer a frantic hive of activity. He rerouted power, recalibrated sensors, and wrote new filtering algorithms on the fly. He was searching for a crack in the wall of noise, a tiny, fleeting window. The jammer was strong, but the desert was vast. There had to be echoes, reflections off rock strata, atmospheric bounces, something they couldn't predict. He found it just as the moon reached its zenith, a tiny, almost microscopic frequency band, less than a kilohertz wide, where the jamming signal was slightly weaker. It was a digital ghost, a faint echo of the original carrier wave. It was barely enough to carry data, but it was a connection. He locked onto it and sent a simple, desperate burst, a query, a question mark encoded in prime numbers. "Are you there? I am being blocked." The response was almost instantaneous, but it wasn't a complex mathematical formula. It was a single, powerful data packet that bypassed his decryption software and rendered itself directly as an image on his screen. It was a map, but this one was different. It showed the world beneath his feet, a complex network of what looked like natural cavern systems, ancient lava tubes, and geological faults, all interconnected. It was a subterranean maze. The map highlighted a single path, a breadcrumb trail leading from a specific point, a collapsed cave entrance about 3 miles from his trailer, deep into the earth, and at the end of the path, 2 miles down, was the source of the signal, glowing like a benign star. It wasn't just a map, it was an escape route, an invitation. They cannot follow you here. Come down, come to me, be safe. Jack stared at the screen, the truth of his situation solidifying into a terrible, simple choice. He could stay here and wait for the technologically advanced, unknown enemy to close in and take him, or he could abandon everything he had ever known and entrust his life to an alien intelligence he didn't understand, descending into the dark, crushing depths of the earth. He looked at the strange shell casing on his table, then back at the glowing map. It wasn't really a choice at all. He spent the next 10 minutes packing a small, rugged backpack, a portable receiver, a water purifier, a geological hammer, a flashlight, and the alien shell casing. He took one last look at his trailer, his sanctuary of solitude that had become a trap. With a heavy heart, he switched off the main power, plunging the small silver home into darkness for the last time. He slipped out the door and into the cold desert night, the weight of the unknown future heavy on his shoulders, and began walking towards the cave.
The cave entrance was little more than a jagged tear in the earth, hidden by a cluster of gnarled mesquite trees. It smelled of dry dust and ancient rock. As Jack ventured deeper, the last vestiges of the desert night vanished, replaced by an absolute, crushing darkness. His flashlight beam became his entire world, a small circle of defiance against the overwhelming void. The path was treacherous. Loose scree underfoot, narrow passages that forced him to turn sideways, and sudden, dizzying drops into unseen chasms. But the map from the signal was his guide, flickering on a small, rugged tablet he carried. It showed him every twist, every turn, every hidden ledge. It was as if the entity below was literally guiding his footsteps, an unseen hand leading him through the labyrinth. Hours blurred into an exhausting eternity. He descended steadily, deeper and deeper, the air growing cooler, heavier, and strangely still. The silence here was different from the desert's. It was a primordial silence, unbroken for millennia, carrying the weight of geological time. He found himself whispering, his voice swallowed by the vastness, just to hear a human sound. As he went deeper, he started noticing anomalies. The rock formations, though natural, seemed to possess an unnatural regularity in places, smooth, polished surfaces that caught the light in strange ways, veins of unknown minerals that glowed with a faint, internal luminescence that wasn't reflected light. These weren't mere caves. They were a place that had been subtly, almost imperceptibly sculpted. The subtle changes intensified. He passed through a chamber where the very air hummed with a low, almost infrasonic vibration that resonated in his chest. His portable receiver, despite the jamming above, picked up faint rhythmic pulses from the surrounding rock. It was the signal, bleeding through the very fabric of the earth, growing stronger with every foot of his descent. It was calling him home. He pressed on, pushing past the burning in his muscles, the weariness in his bones. His mind was a maelstrom of fear and exhilaration. What waited for him at the end of this journey? A simple artifact? A living being? A truth that would shatter his perception of reality? Finally, after what felt like an entire day of continuous descent, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space.
His flashlight beam, which had been so potent in the confined passages, was swallowed by the sheer scale of it. He stood on a high ledge, looking down into an abyss of unimaginable size. And then he saw it. Far below, hundreds of feet beneath him, a soft, ethereal light pulsed. It wasn't a single point. It was a diffused glow emanating from a colossal structure. It was perfectly geometrical, impossibly smooth, and utterly alien. It wasn't built into the rock. It seemed to be the rock, or something that had grown from it. There were no sharp angles, only graceful curves and interlocking patterns that seemed to shift and flow as he watched. It was immense, larger than any building he had ever seen, filling the entire chasm, and at its very heart, pulsing with a steady, rhythmic brilliance, was the source of the signal, the heart of the Mojave. Jack felt no fear now, only a profound sense of awe. He had found it, the thing that had called to him from the deep, the silent architect of the subterranean world. He had stepped into a place beyond human comprehension, a secret kept for millennia, hidden beneath the desolate, whispering sands of the Mojave. The descent from the high ledge to the base of the colossal structure was a journey into a different kind of silence, a silence filled with light. The ethereal glow from the alien object was enough to illuminate his path, revealing details he couldn't have seen with his flashlight alone. The walls of the cavern shimmered, embedded with countless tiny crystalline formations that reflected the soft light, making the entire space feel alive, breathing. As he got closer, the true scale of the object became overwhelming. It wasn't just large, it was monolithic, stretching hundreds of yards in every direction, its topmost reaches lost in the distant, shadowed ceiling of the cavern. The surface was impossibly smooth, like polished obsidian, yet it pulsed with that soft, internal luminescence. He saw no seams, no joins, no visible means of construction. It was as if it had simply grown from the earth, or was a single, vast, perfectly formed entity. The humming sound grew louder, no longer just a vibration, but a complex symphony of low-frequency tones. He felt it in his teeth, in the marrow of his bones. It was a language, he realized, but one meant for the very cells of his body, bypassing his ears entirely. He reached the base of the structure, his hand outstretched, hesitant. The surface was cool to the touch, smooth as glass, yet he could feel the subtle energy pulsating beneath his palm. It was alive, or at least it was profoundly active. Then the light intensified. Not a sudden flash, but a slow, deliberate brightening, focusing on a section of the structure directly in front of him. A section that began to subtly shift, to reconfigure itself. Like liquid metal flowing into new shapes, the smooth surface rippled, forming an opening. It wasn't a door. It was a revelation. A pathway opened, leading into the heart of the structure. It was dark within, a profound, beckoning darkness that contrasted sharply with the glowing exterior. For a moment, Jack hesitated. This was the point of no return. But the compulsion, the deep-seated need for answers was too strong to resist. He stepped inside. The interior was not what he expected. It was not a control room, nor a living space. It was a single vast chamber, circular in design, its walls curving upwards into the darkness. The air inside was warm, almost balmy, and smelled faintly of ozone and something else, something clean and indescribably ancient. And everywhere, on every surface, were the patterns, the mathematical equations, the star charts, the biological blueprints he had seen in the signal were now projected on the walls in shimmering holographic light. They moved, they flowed, they evolved, presenting an entire library of alien knowledge, an entire history unfolding before his eyes. But there was no console, no seats, no other being, just the vast chamber filled with the whispers of knowledge. He was alone, yet utterly surrounded by an intelligence that transcended his wildest dreams. He was in the heart of the machine, the library of a forgotten race, or perhaps the mind of a single, colossal entity. He took a step forward, then another, drawn deeper into the pulsating light of the alien knowledge. His hand reached out, not to touch, but simply to embrace the overwhelming truth of it all. He was no longer just a radio amateur from the Mojave. He was a guest, an initiate, on the threshold of a revelation that would not just change his life, but potentially the course of human history.
As Jack ventured deeper into the chamber of whispers, the holographic projections shifted and swirled around him, reacting to his presence. They weren't just displays, they were interactive. As he focused his gaze on a particular star chart, it would expand, revealing constellations unknown to humanity, nebulae forming in patterns that defied terrestrial astrophysics. When he considered a biological diagram, the image would resolve into cellular structures, then DNA helixes, then entire alien biospheres, evolving and changing before his eyes. It was more than just data. It was a living, breathing archive of an entire civilization, or perhaps an entire galactic network of them. He realized, with a staggering sense of awe, that the signal he had been receiving was merely a fraction of this vast informational ocean. He had tapped into the equivalent of a cosmic internet, waiting patiently for someone to log on. The low, resonant hum intensified, and he felt a presence. Not a physical one, but a mental one, a gentle, probing touch on the edges of his consciousness. It wasn't invasive or aggressive, but rather curious, ancient, and profoundly intelligent. It was the entity, the collective consciousness of the architects of this chamber. It communicated, not through sound or image, but through pure thought, a direct transfer of information that bypassed language barriers entirely. It showed him visions of a distant past, a species not unlike humans in their drive for knowledge, but infinitely more patient. They had not built cities in the sky, but delved into the earth, finding peace and understanding in the planet's core. Visions of technology, not ships that crossed galaxies, but devices that manipulated causality, that communicated across vast distances, not with radio waves, but with entangled particles. The shell casing he found outside flashed in his mind, a piece of their forgotten outer world tech lost during an early, short-lived exploration. Visions of purpose. They were not conquerors nor missionaries, they were archivists, keepers of knowledge. They had found Earth millennia ago, saw its potential, and decided to plant a seed, a beacon, a library, hidden deep within its crust. A passive observer, waiting for a species to evolve enough, to listen enough, to find it. He understood now. The Mojave signal wasn't a distress call or an invasion warning. It was a test, a universal CAPTCHA, designed to filter out the unworthy, the unobservant, the unprepared. Only those with the curiosity, the intellect, and the patience to truly listen would ever find this place. Jack, the solitary radio enthusiast, had passed the test. The mental communication wasn't a single voice, but a chorus, an echo of countless minds woven together, forming a vast, compassionate intelligence. It showed him Earth's future as they envisioned it, not as a conquest, but as a potential partnership, a choice. Humanity was at a crossroads, nearing the maturity to either destroy itself or embrace a wider cosmic consciousness. This chamber was an offer. He felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, a connection to something far vaster than himself. The loneliness that had defined his life in the desert evaporated, replaced by the profound realization that he was a tiny, vital link in an ancient, ongoing chain of cosmic intelligence. But then the feeling shifted. The gentle mental touch grew agitated. The holographic projections on the walls flickered, distorting into chaotic patterns.
The resonant hum pulsed with a new, urgent rhythm, no longer a chorus of whispers, but a warning bell. The entity had sensed them, the watchers on the surface. They were close, too close, and they were not here to listen. The entity's warning was not a premonition, it was a real-time observation. Through its connection to the very rock of the desert, it could feel the clumsy, violent intrusion from above. It showed Jack a final vision, not of the distant past, but of the immediate present. A massive, advanced drilling machine boring through the earth with brutal efficiency. The watchers were not trying to find a path, they were creating one with force. The serene chorus of minds in Jack's consciousness fractured, replaced by a single, focused thought, a desperate and profound question. It explained that it could not fight. Its nature was to observe, to record, to share. Physical conflict was a concept it had archived but never practiced. It had only two options in the face of capture. It could initiate a total system collapse, erasing the millennia of knowledge stored within this chamber to prevent it from falling into the hands of a species that would weaponize it. The library would simply cease to exist, leaving nothing but dead rock. Or it could preserve a single essential fragment. It could imprint a core seed of its consciousness, its most vital data, onto a compatible biological host. The archive would go dormant, appearing inert and lifeless to the intruders, but its essence, its soul, would survive in a new form, a living echo. The choice was Jack's. He could allow this place of wonders to be annihilated, or he could become its living vessel, sacrificing his own simple existence to become a sanctuary for a cosmic intelligence. He looked at the flickering visions of the drilling machine, a symbol of humanity's impatient, destructive curiosity. Then he looked at the beautiful flowing equations that represented a path of wisdom and patience. His life of solitude in the desert, his endless nights of listening, it had all been a preparation for this single, monumental moment. "I'll do it," he whispered, and the thought was enough. "I will listen." The chamber responded instantly. The chaotic warning lights vanished, replaced by a single blindingly brilliant beam of pure white light that erupted from the heart of the structure and engulfed him. It was not a physical force, but a torrent of pure information, of memories, of alien starlight and ancient wisdom pouring directly into his mind. He felt his own consciousness, his identity as Jack, dissolve, not in pain, but like a single drop of rain merging with an infinite ocean. He saw the birth of galaxies, felt the slow, patient thoughts of geological time, and understood the interconnectedness of all things. Simultaneously, the great structure began to die. The ethereal glow faded from its walls. The resonant hum descended the scale until it became an inaudible vibration. And then, nothing. The chamber of whispers fell silent for the first time in an eon. Moments later, a final explosive charge blew a hole in the far wall. Soldiers in advanced, dark gray combat armor poured into the chamber, weapons raised, their helmet-mounted lights cutting sterile beams through the sudden darkness. They swept the vast, silent room, their expressions a mixture of triumph and confusion. They had breached the vault, but the treasure was gone. The structure was cold, inert, just a strange, oversized rock. They found Jack standing in the center of the chamber, his eyes open, gazing at nothing. He did not react to their presence, their shouted commands. He was calm, serene, his face a mask of profound peace. They took him into custody, a silent, compliant prize. But as they led him away, one of the soldiers looked back at Jack's face and recoiled. For a fleeting second, reflected in the man's pupils, he swore he didn't see the dark cave, but a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. Jack was gone, but he remained. He was now the Mojave signal, a silent echo of a cosmic mind, walking the surface of the earth, a library of wonders hidden behind the eyes of a quiet, unassuming man. The searchers had found their target, but they had missed the message entirely. For the greatest secrets are not buried in the earth, but are carried in the hearts of those who are willing to truly listen.